This is the stormiest time of the week to take a little break and do something since storms are really keeping us from doing much anything else. So here's a chance for you to just get away from the storm a little bit and hear an interesting discussion, and hopefully somebody will chime in or something and want to discuss. I will let's see. I can put in invite guests right here in the chat, and I will quickly open Facebook and post it there. I will try to keep an eye on the comments on my phone as best I can. I'm not good about it, but I'm going to try my best here. This is kind of like the part where anytime I'm watching a YouTube video. There we go. I'll put it there. And hopefully, let's see, is it showing me live? Yeah, here we go. So I'll put it underneath here. So if you want to join in, you can. All right, so I'll try to keep an eye out. So we're going to talk about the Communist Manifesto today and how the United States, by all means, I mean, how can anybody say we're not communist at this point? But before I do that, I want to say something really important um, about some of the attention that Hugh Squire has been getting this week. And I have to say kudos and congratulations for getting attention from some big name celebrities here lately who've been liking posts and reading what Hugh has to say about his murdered wives. And some of those names, if I haven't missed anybody, Sarah McLaughlin, Elvira, also known as Cassandra Peterson. Elvira is actually her stage name. Dolly Parton, Bette Midler with Whoopi Goldberg, and today, the Prince of Dubai, who was visiting uh, Dollywood this week, also mentioned or liked one of Hugh's posts. And now you have these celebrities that are reading powerful truth, and hopefully they'll spread this message um, as they very well should. So now let's go back to what we got here now. So here I have the Communist Manifesto. So I was up in Columbus. I got me a copy here. So I'm reading straight from the 1848 book right here. Okay. Yeah, it's a reprint, obviously, but it's after the original. So let's look at different parts of the Communist Manifesto. And as we talk about it, we're going to discuss how America's kind of already gone down this pathway. And is there anything left that's, can we honestly say that we're not already, we haven't already accepted all these tenets of communism? Here I'm going to start kind of far into it, but I've outlined a few parts that I want to mention. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures, there emerges a world literature. So there's basically their goal is to have one world, one literature trying to tell the truth here. Hi, Hugh. Up already? I'm going to stop my Facebook because when we don't always get the best signal on here together, so we'll see what happens.
All Americans love the communist Pope.
Yeah, yeah. And which is just mind blowing, isn't it? So I'm talking here about national one sidedness and narrow mindedness become more and more impossible. And from the numerous national and local literatures, there emerges a world literature. So only one, their vision of one government world eventually would have all the ability to propagandize the world. And I think that's very, very true in your life, Hugh. Uh, I mean, all of the literature, the movies, and the music has conglomerated together to hide your story in one massive movement with the government. That is, in and of itself, exactly a fulfillment of what Marx is saying here. It has agglomerated population, centralized means of production, and has concentrated property in a few hands. So they were saying in this book that was already starting to happen in some places, and they wanted more of that. One government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, one customs tariff. The whole idea is just one controlling everything. And I don't see how that's not already very much a part of our national character today. Technically, we still have local control on some issues. However, virtually everything is manipulated from the federal government through various programs and acts. They're not, they can't even call them laws from the federal government, through acts that grant money to the states, and they use that money and withhold it as necessary to enact what it wants done from the central government. Um, let's see. Now, here's another thing I think is kind of interesting here. Now, here again, he's saying this in 1848. And this is talking about how women will become men by design. And this fascinates me that they knew this and were planning it. And I think that they were planning this to put it here, at some point. And obviously, his plan was to make one world. So the less the skill and exertion of strength implied in manual labor, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of men superseded by that of women. So, as work becomes easier, we get more women in the workplace, and eventually you have more women than men in the workplace. Well, naturally, because there are more women than men, period. Uh, Differences in age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. And this is what you see with the unisex movement today, that there is no difference between men and women in their minds. And now we have to put up with the insanity of a world where we have to dance on eggshells around ladies in the workplace that makes working so incredibly difficult nowadays. And they have made it now where not only it's and part of why this is creating such an abundance of laborers, that they intentionally made it so that instead of one person being able to feed a family by going to work, now it takes two people. And now the wages are so low by design through inflation and so forth, taking so much value that now it'll take three or more incomes in one household just to barely survive. And they were already working on this in 1848. Differences in age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use according to their age and sex. No sooner is the exploitation of the laborer by the manufacturer so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash than he is set upon by another portion of the bourgeois. Those are the business owners, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. And then he goes on and he says that all your small businesses. Oh, did I lose you, Hugh? Oh, you're okay. You're going off and back on there. There you go. So then he goes on to say that all the small businesses are basically the same as workers. So he's putting a contrast not between your mom and pa shop and the worker, but not the small business, but the big businesses and so forth as different. The Jeff Bezos of the world, who the news said that he's got at least $2 trillion, though you've said before, Hugh, that he probably has way more than $2 trillion. That your business was worth that decades ago, so his is probably worth more than that with our deflated currency and so forth now. So, um, so they want to set a difference between the workers and these huge, colossal businesses. this book, it uses the words bourgeois, which if you don't know that, those are the business owners and the proletariat. So if you ever read that, the proletariat is the workers and the bourgeois are the business owners. So, and their goal is to have all the property that business owners have put into the hands of the workers. So, in essence, you could say that the less talented, the less gifted, the less intelligent, in many cases, people are supposed to be rewarded by confiscating, which is exactly what happened during the French Revolution, during the Russian Revolution, where they confiscated the land of the bourgeois business owners, and the less gifted and the less intelligent people were gifted all that as common property. But one of the biggest problems that they didn't seem to ever work on in this book was how to implement this in any sort of a fair and just way. So you have just the fixation on communism itself as being for the people, and what happens is one guy says, "Oh, I can do that," and so he becomes, in place of a king, the same thing as a dictator that says, "Now uh, I can give you everybody, take everybody's stuff and give it to everybody." And there's no way for the proletariat that they're supposed to be protecting to ever be sure that they're actually equal with the government. Now they might be equal with the big business, but the government just took the place of the big business, and now things are handed out to their friends instead of to the proletariat as they expected. And I think that was the biggest failure of Marx and the early communists, is that they never created a system of government whereby they could implement these things and redress their government itself without descending into a quasi dictatorship. So now here's another section here I want to read here. The abolition of truth, religion, and historical precedent. Yeah, go ahead there. You sorry. You look like you want to say something.
I'm going to leave. I got a really bad echo, and I don't want to wreck your restream. Um,
I'm sorry.
you have a good day. And I'm an ASCAP publisher on Broadway in New York since the 60s. So I have a lot of entertainers liking the fact that police covered up the murders of all four of my wives and, and all as they steal my heritage in museums.
Yeah.
And police and bikers were hired as hitmen to murder my wives. Even the Prince of Dubai covered.
Mm.
You have a good evening.
Well, you too, Hugh. And I
All Americans love the communist Pope.
yeah,
The Republicans want to make him the law of the land.
right, right.
That's so stupid. It's pathetic.
Yeah, it is. So what he was saying a little bit there, I'm sorry that we never do seem to get a good signal. I don't know why, but so he's talking about how the actresses and that we named earlier are reading his posts and liking the fact that he's telling his story about his murdered wives and how police are part of these murders. In fact, one of his murdered wives, when she lived in Wisconsin and Hugh lived in Tennessee, we'll get back to the Communist Manifesto here in a minute. But she was kidnapped by two police, or two or three. off-duty policemen, and she escaped. She got out when they stopped somewhere. She escaped, went back home, called Hugh in Tennessee and said, Hugh, you're the only one I can trust. So can you help me? And he went up to Wisconsin and brought her down to Tennessee. And the very first day that they were back in Tennessee, they were in front of Dollywood, and a car comes up extremely fast and rear ends them, puts both of them in the hospital. And then later on, she was murdered, hanged in her own dog's leash. And then Hugh saw her hanging, took her down, gave her mouth to mouth CPR, called for a helicopter, and the helicopter took her to the hospital, and they killed her again in the hospital 30 days later, just like they would do again to Victoria later on. So, two wives this happened to. So, very concerted effort with policemen to rape women and murder people. So, that's the kind of government we're fighting. But there's some people now that are seeing this story, you know, and we already know that a lot of people know it. That's how they were able to put it in movies like Friday the 13th, Part 2, where Terry and Victoria are named in the movie. And Jason, who's actually Terry's son in real life, is Jason, the Friday the 13th killer in the movie. And he kills both of them very similar to how they were murdered in real life. And there's no way that's just coincidence. So, anyway, we'll get back to communism here. So here it says there are, besides, I'm going to back up a paragraph. That's too far down. That's the part I underlined. Let's go back a little. Undoubtedly, it will be said religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived the changes through all these centuries. There are, besides, eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths. Think about that. It abolishes all religion. This is why, if you wanted to be a member of the Communist Party in Russia or even today in China, you have to at least say that you're an atheist. Now, what you'd really believe in private, I don't know that they examine it that closely. Maybe they do, but uh, you have to at least uh, you have to at least profess that you're an atheist to be a member of the Communist Party. And of course, when the Communist Party rules a nation, it is a one party system. And so, if you're to have any voice in the government whatsoever, you would have to be a declared atheist at least. Now, that does not necessarily mean that the nation abolishes all religion, only that if you're a member of the party, you have to be a part of it. Because, for example, even in Russia, you have the Soviet Socialist Republic, right? Was the actual name of it? Union of Socialists. It's actually a socialist nation, but the communists were a party in it. So you might be not of the party and still be allowed to practice your religion to some extent. Supposedly, even in China today, there are more Christians than in most of the rest of the world put together, technically speaking. But none of those Christians are allowed to participate in government, at least if they are known Christians, because you would have to profess to be an atheist to be a member of the Communist Party. But here it is. It says communism goes a step further. It doesn't abolish religion. Okay, it's okay for your country to have religion. What it does is it abolishes eternal truth itself. And tell me that's not what we have today. I mean, if you can declare that you are a female when you're not, make up pretend pronouns, and force other people to uh, sell you what you want to hear, how have you not abolished eternal truths? Because an objective reality, because now objective reality has been determined by the state, and those most loyal to the state and are supported by the state are now being allowed to define the uh, eternal truths as it is, as it's being turned into. The communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion, but it doesn't really, because it says it abolishes all religion, but every communist country has not adopted it like that. It has adopted the destruction of eternal truth and the need for propaganda from the state, as we've already talked about, but it did not. Uh, they do not abolish all religion altogether in these nations, and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. So really think about this. So they're saying it doesn't matter what the precedent of the last 2,000 years is, or 5,000 years of human government and human history. We're going to contradict all past historical experience and come up with this new idea of communism where the workers now have the less gifted, the less talented, and in some cases just the less fortunate are now supposed to be elevated to the same level as the people who created and invented everything. And this is what happened, in the French Revolution and then the Soviet revolutions. Is if you owned land, if you had any title of royalty, any sort of royal title, they'd strip that from you, take your land. If you resisted, you'd be beheaded in France. Some 70 or 80,000 beheadings during the French Revolution, and your land distributed. Now, eventually, they had another revolution and gave it all back in France. So France was a little weird, but they flirted with these communist ideas, calling themselves Jacobins, but the Jacobins were essentially communists. They would say things like, fraternity, brotherhood, and equality, and so forth. But they their type of equality again takes the power from the from the business owners, and instead of giving it to the people as promised, instead gives it to the people organizing the protest or the revolution. And so only a few people end up. And in France, they figured that out really fast, had a counter revolution, and got it all back. Otherwise, they would probably be in the sad situation of a place like China or North Korea today. And how unfortunate that would be. The French were a little quicker on the uptake than some of these other countries and quickly produced a counter revolution and got their private property back, not quite to the same state that they did. And at least then they created a new constitution and without the monarchy. Now, central powers altogether have been a problem. Centralized power has been a problem for thousands of years. And this is the failure of humanity. So that's the failure of the Communist Manifesto, is centralized power at the top. That's what's the problem with America, is we are still being ruled through the powers in Great Britain that we kicked out. Instead, she has spent the throne has spent the last 200 years knighting uh, musicians and actors and so forth. This is why you see Prince Harry, and Merkel coming down, or Markle coming to California and making movies and so forth. Why he married an actress, and why the Queen, before she died, said she's going to build a big outdoor movie theater at one of her palaces, because she was saying that we're coming for the movie industry, the same that they did in the 1970s and 80s with the British invasion of rock and roll, when they came and they took over many billions and billions of dollars of U.S. money in order to take it all back to the throne. And that gives them the power that they need to control most of the world. So they will implement this sort of communist idea on you, as they take everything for themselves, and that's the biggest failure of communism is they don't structure their government. They just leave it up to a dictator to impose these principles. Now, there are other obvious problems with communism that when you take out the people that can make things and do things and take their stuff away from them and then tell all the people who don't know how to do that, now you go do it. What you had in many cases was starvation. And that's a lot of that's what happened in China under Mao is the millions of people who died of starvation simply because they didn't know how to do anything because they'd killed all the people who knew how to do it and who had owned all the land and had done it for centuries. you know, I heaven help us if I had to be a farmer, right? Do I know how to can things and grow the right kinds of vegetables on the right kind of soil? No, no. I mean, I have a small garden out there, but we just pick what we want and throw the rest out for the rabbits to eat. I mean, it's just, this is when you take away the people that know how to do things, you're left and say you're giving it to the people who don't know how to do things, nothing gets done and people die. So that's another problem. Now, the Communist Manifesto, just like the 10 Commandments, it has 10 listed statements here. So these have been well known and spoken of now for the last 200 years, but have you heard them? So let's go over them and let's talk about these. Number one, the abolition of property and land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So, how far have we already come in this country to the abolition of private property? Do you ever in this country get to own your own private property? Do you realize in the state of West Virginia, you don't even get to own a car because just like your house, for the rest of your life, you have to pay a property tax on your house and car in West Virginia. Your house in most other states, but there are other states that tax your car for the rest of your life. So that means if you're 85 years old and your social security ain't enough to make the house payment, guess what? You or not the house payment, but the property tax on the house, your house could be paid off. It could be yours, quote unquote, but that means absolutely nothing. So in this country, they have already taken away the right to private property. Uh, and even a lot of public property you are not allowed to use. How many times have you gone up to a wooded zone and it says government wildlife reclamation area, do not enter? Well, what do you mean I cannot enter something that supposedly has been put forth for the people? And again, that's because once the government takes the power and takes the property, they're not doing it for the worker as promised, for the public, as we'd say in America, as promised. No, they're doing it for them and for their own purposes. And it doesn't matter what you think or if you get any use out of it. Oh, you get a vote, but, you know, your vote counts very, very, very little in this country. They have now organized it where two sides say the same thing, and there's so little difference that it just doesn't even matter at this point. So, abolition of property and land and application of all rents and lands to public purposes. But it's basically just baloney. So, number two, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Do you remember the time when you heard Hillary Clinton running for president and they asked her, well, what is your governmental philosophy? Are you conservative? Are you liberal? What do you call yourself, Hillary? And she said, I call myself a progressive. And here you see in 1848, Karl Marx using this word, and it's not by coincidence that Hillary Clinton specifically chose and made more public that word progressive. Before she said that, not very many people had been using it since that Christian progressive movement back in the late 1800s with Billy Sunday and those the temperance movement. They would call themselves progressives, right? Well, here you see the heavy progressive. What are they progressing towards? Are they progressing towards better society, better structure, better rights? But not really. No, they're progressing towards things like this one here, a graduated income tax, which when it started in America right after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, where all the wealthy people who did not want the income tax implemented in America were killed deliberately and sank on the Titanic, you were the income tax was set and then promised to only be 1%. Okay, so that's how they got it to you. You had 1% uh, of the wealth that of your income that had to be paid starting out. But by the time 20 or 30 years later, by the time you get to Roosevelt, you now have businesses paying 99%. Millionaire or not businesses, but millionaires happen to pay 99% of their income. And so that's why they created the loopholes that we now enjoy because, well, what's the incentive of working if you take that? But this is what they're progressing towards. They're progressing towards not taking all the wealth and giving it to you, the silly worker. No, no, no. They're taking all of that and they're using it to start wars, fund wars, and protect their own properties. What was Roosevelt doing in World War II? He was protecting his own properties in the Pacific. And it didn't matter how many hundreds of thousands of doughboys died. In fact, in uh, World War One, when our soldiers were sent out to war, the major purpose of that was new taxes, not the income tax. Well, it was right after the income tax. This freshly created income tax was now used against the widows of our soldiers intentionally. Think about that. Income tax was 1914, 13 or 14. World War One, 3 years later, we're in war, right? That is not coincidence. You think we were fighting a legitimate, just war to stop Germany? That has no, 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 no. You have been brainwashed. The purpose of the war was to use that income tax to steal massive amounts of property off of widows that whose husbands went to war, died in war, hundreds of thousands of people. And now this new income tax, they have no money. Oh, the government could come in and take all that land back. That's how despicable your government is in this. And this is what, when somebody says they're progressive, these are the things that they're progressing towards. Okay. So they're not progressing towards anything for you. They're progressing to take things away from you through a graduated income tax. In that case, graduated just means it's supposed to be more for the higher wage earners and goes up from small to higher. Now we have really high income taxes on the people who don't make anything and on the middle class. Exactly the opposite of what is being said here in this. But that's the natural result once you go down that road. Number 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. For a short time, for just 1 year, the Republicans in this case passed a abolition of the inheritance tax in this country. And for 1 year, this country enjoyed uh, the right to pass on your property to your kids that you worked your whole life for. And should you not be able to do that? Well, of course you should, because they're telling you through that when you have an inheritance tax that, again, you have no right to property. Everything belongs to the government. Now, in China, that accepted this system, people know that. In China, you might live in an apartment, but you're not the owner is not the landlord; it's the state. So the state is now the new bourgeois, the new business owner, and you pay the government. If the government just says, well, you're gone tomorrow, you don't get 30 days, you don't get 60 days. It's just see you later, adios. We don't want you here. And so we've adopted that in this country through inheritance taxes, so that now you don't need a World War I to steal everybody's property. You get it every generation all over again. You see how craftily they did that? So we've accepted these first three premises of the Communist Manifesto quite readily in this country, haven't we? Number 4, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. I want you to really think about that for a second, because why do you think we have 20, 30 million illegal immigrants in this country? It isn't because we care about immigrants. If you believe that, please see me. I have some very special property I'd like to sell you, okay? It's very wet and it's out in the middle of the desert, and it's going to make a fortune someday. I want you to buy this property if you believe that. Immigrants are brought to this nation to be taken advantage of, to drive down the wage for the middle class. Again, not to help the bourgeois that they're supposed to be helping. No, or I mean the proletariat. That there's, I think, did I say bourgeois a minute ago when I meant proletariat? I think I did. They're not helping us proletariats here. They're those workers. I think my words were getting scrambled there a minute ago. But anyway, the proletariat's the workers, the bourgeois is the business owners. So they're not doing this. They're not bringing immigrants in this country to help the workers. No, they're doing it to fight the workers. And then they can use these immigrants in any way that they want. That's how in Hugh's story, immigrants have been used. Christian immigrants were used by George Bush to lie about 9/11 and to say that Hugh's friend had funded the terrorists that flew the airplanes. So this is how your government uses immigrants. This is why the guy who shot up Las Vegas had connections in the Philippines, So if he was even the one that pulled the trigger, I even doubt that. All right, so confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Okay, so number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank. Think about that. With state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Now, your government tells you all the time that monopolization by business is bad. However, how many government monopolies do we now possess? We have a government monopoly that runs your schools, do we not? That does not allow competition. Except now, technically we have private schools in this country. Nobody can afford them, except the very, very rich. Yeah, not the not the bourgeois. The people working for the state can afford them. But us proletariat, we have zero chance of ever being able to afford a private school. And I just wanted to try to go back here and see if anybody has said anything in these comments here. Okay, nope. Okay. But feel free to call in if you want to try. I did put it in my Facebook there. I did not put it in YouTube. Yeah, oh well. You'll just have to listen if you're on YouTube, I guess. So, national bank. So, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by the national bank. Thomas Jefferson warned us and warned us and warned us against what Madison. This is why Madison's on the $10 bill. Okay. Because he pushed for the state national bank that we eventually got. Thomas Jefferson warned us in the Federalist Papers, if you, and I can't quote it perfectly, but if you allow a national bank, your kids will grow up bankrupt and owning nothing in a nation where we've been given everything, and one day you're going to wake up and no one will have anything. And that's exactly what's happening. The banks forever own your property along with the federal government. We now have, with the shortly after the passing of the graduated income tax, federal income tax, we now also have the Federal Reserve Act just 20 or so years later. So now all finance is in the hands of a few small banks. And where are most of those banks from? Oh, Great Britain, of course. The people that we kicked out. So that's one of the ways that they have got their claws back into this country was through the national banks. So, number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Now, centralization of communication. How impossible is it in this country for you to get your message out? Nobody knows that better than you because communication has been so centralized that he couldn't even get obituaries in the local paper for his murdered wives because they did not want his story out because he was, again, raped by children of governors and by famous people, and then his family's wealth taken by the throne, by the FBI, working together to steal the wealth of the nation from the children of the founders of this country. And that's the best way I think that I can explain Hugh's story in one sentence, if you could boil it down that much, is that the federal government and the FBI working in contingency with the throne of England put America's children, our founders' heritage together and stole from them. And Hugh had a massive amount of wealth in his family and his lineage that was stolen. Uh, so, how does he get that message out? He can't because literally every, and I mean literally every news station, every radio station that you hear works together with the federal government to keep any message from going all the way down to your local newspaper. So you could say, well, I could print copies, well, and I could get the message out. Well, technically you can. I mean, we put it on Facebook, right? We're getting in the hands of a few celebrities. But you'll always be overwhelmingly overpowered and overmatched by a government with endless resources that has stolen all of your wealth to suffocate your message, while at the same time they hint and allude to Hugh's story all over the radio songs that we hear every day and to movies that we've all seen. His story is in those movies, but they've done it in a way to hide the real message so that later when people look up or they get a little piece of the story, they look it up, they are misdirected. I'm thinking again of when Hugh called Coast to Coast AM, very well known AM radio station, and the woman Sophie Stewart, who made the Matrix and Terminators books, was being interviewed by that guy with the big deep voice on Coast to Coast AM. And that night, you had called in, and that night that guy got fired from the radio. A very well known person on the radio. That night he was off the radio because he allowed Hugh to call in and talk to him, and Hugh had managed to get through and just say a little bit about his story. Think about how amazingly suffocating your government has to be to watch in detail everything that goes on like this. And of course they have to in Hugh's case because they've stolen so much of the history and wealth of the United States through from his lineage and from his family. That's why it has to be done the way it's being done. So they monitor everything that they say. I guarantee you somebody from the government will even probably watch this because Hugh, I think, is still listening over there on the other side there. So they'll make sure that they know every last little word that is said, every little last thing that he does. So this is exactly how we've already accepted this centralization of the means of communication. You also have the FCC. You have to have licenses for everything. You can't even have just a simple radio without a licensing permit. A little handheld radio. Uh, most of them, the more powerful ones, like some of my friends have, you have to have a license just for that. So they own everything in the hands of the state. Centralization of the means of communication. Now, and transport. Think about that. One little word, but there that's just pregnant with implication. So all transport is in the hands of the state. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're driving an Amish buggy, they'll tell you, well, you better put the little orange placard on the back or you can't go out on the road. And they're like, well, but we don't believe in the color orange. Well, it doesn't matter what you believe. You had to put your orange sticker on the back. But we're willing to accept the risks and get plowed over by cars. No, you have to put the orange sticker on there. I mean, nobody is out of the reach of this over expansive centralized federal government. All transport, I have to have a CDL to drive, and you should see how complicated some of the procedures are that come with CDLs if you're not familiar with it, especially if you want to pick up something from a train and you have hazardous materials. Oh my gosh, you think just getting it's a nightmare just getting your CDL, but you try to go that extra level and get all that extra. I don't even remember what they call it now. There's a whole nother level of stuff. And I don't mean just the hazardous materials. That's just a small part of it. There's a whole nother level you have to go through. Then you have to get your license plate and your driver's license constantly renewed. All transport is in the hands of the state. If you do something on an airplane, you has to be labeled with United Nations numbers. I used to take products to the airport daily. Drive, go pick up medical products from the hospitals and take them to the airport and put them in a box and had to have the right UN stickers, because the United Nations is now the central one world authority, if you will, of transport in the hands of the state. That's number 6 that we're talking about here out of these lists of 10 commandments, if you will, straight from the Communist Manifesto. So, number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. So you have now the federal government saying to factories, to nuclear facilities, that you cannot deal with your waste properly. Oh, you have to deal with it to keep it from poisoning everybody, but somehow you can't find a place where you can put it like Yucca Mountain. They all say, well, let's all take all of our nuclear spent waste to Yucca Mountain. And the federal government won't allow them to do it. And so the nuclear waste piles up in these places. I know a little bit about that because a lot of my relatives work at the plant where they enrich uranium in Piketon, Ohio. And they've had to keep waste there because the federal government, which oversees everything in facilities like that, uh, wouldn't let them take the waste. And now you've got power plants, a brand new nuclear power plant just started up in South Carolina. For the next several generations, they're going to have to keep all their waste on their property because the federal government controls what you can do about it. Why can't we be like Anne Rand said, AYN Rand, who said, you know, people should get to decide whether or not they make roads on their own. Private businesses should be able to decide whether or not they make roads. Because when you say that the federal government has to be the ones to make roads, you've just admitted. Now I'm kind of semi quoting best I can, paraphrasing Ayn Rand here. When you say that the ability to make a road is in the hands of the state, you're saying, well, somebody's already made that money because the state doesn't make money. It takes the money from the people through taxation. So the money's already there, and the need for it is already there. Let people solve their own problems. And of course, we could make our own roads. Do you think if the government would get out of the way, the Amish would make their own little dirt roads to get their buggies off the roads for us? I guarantee you they would. They'd all get together and make their own buggy roads right through their property. But the federal government's going to get in the way, of this sort of thing. So, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the states, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil, generally in accordance with a common plan. Improvement of the soil. This is why Roosevelt got stuck with this Dust Bowl. Yeah, that really did need done. Okay, they improved the soil. Okay, I'll give them that. That was a national disaster that needed fixed. But now they've taken that program that was so important, and they do things like this. Okay, when my mother and stepfather wanted to buy a campground. Oh, more than 70 years ago, there had been a small gas station on the front of their property by the road. The federal government had to come in and do this state testing to make sure that there was no leaked oil anywhere. Now they don't care about, the nuclear waste that's piling up for now many decades in power plants all around the nation, but maybe a little bit of oil could have possibly seeped from the land. And so we have to do an environmental study, hold up the purchase of this property. $500,000 property back when half a million still meant something. $500,000 property. We're going to hold up the purchase of this property because 70 some years ago there used to be one tank of gas buried under the ground under here at a little tiny gas station in the front by the road. So the government manages to get in the way, regulate, and cause problems every chance they get in accordance with a common plan, as it says. Number 8, equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Wow. I mean, this is huge. Equal liability of all to labor. Think about that. That means you were required to work. In the Soviet Union, when you had a um, community farm in some areas, you had to work so many hours a day, usually 12 to 16 hours a day. They'd force all ages. Didn't matter if you were old, if you broke your arm, just too bad. If you can't work that day, they would cut your ration of food that you're allowed to get each week. So, and people starved by the amount of rations they give them anyway. If you didn't work, you wouldn't even get that tiny little ration of rice and flour and so forth that they would give them. Um, and our country tried to replicate things like this through the Conservation Corps and that sort of thing. They were prepping and planning to try to create an instrument like this, but they were not able to get there yet. So you got food stamps instead, under Johnson's program, more progressivism, which, yes, that did help alleviate poverty for now. But because of the inflation that these programs are causing, look at where we're at now, 60 years later. Are we going to be able to do this forever? No, of course we're not going to be able to do this forever. So there is liability of all to labor. Think about when Obama said you have to pay for this. You have to pay for this health care plan, this Obamacare, because I care about you so much. You have to pay for it. And not only that, but the doctors, you have a right to health care. The right to health care implies the liability of that doctor to labor. This is straight from the Communist Manifesto. When you say you have a right to health care, that right does not exist unless you, uh, what's the word when you force somebody to join the military? I can't think of the word, but unless you recruit these people to force them to join the labor force and work for you. You do not have a right to health care unless there's forced labor. So the liability of all to labor. Now, think about this establishment of industrial armies. Do you remember when Barack Obama was up in Chicago and he said, we need an army inside the country that's just as big and just as well funded as the national army? This is the kind of crap he was talking about. And you heard, I don't know, there must have been 500,000 people there in Lincoln Park, and all of them just cheering to that. It just, my head almost blew up. Like, how can you hate your country this bad to cheer such an insane statement as what Obama said there? How in the world do you want an army that's inside the country? Right now your army is not allowed to operate inside the country. It's not allowed to be a police force, not allowed to assist the police. I mean, by the Constitution. But Obama just blatantly said, forget the Constitution. We want a well-funded army, inside the country, and 500,000 brain-dead people in Lincoln Park. Woo! Yeah, we want that. Yeah, forget our rights. Let's put a gun to our head every single day. Let's make our lives so miserable that we can't even grow food in our backyards, like happened in the Soviet Union and in Romania and these communist countries where they weren't even allowed to have small gardens like I have in my backyard right now. You know, you weren't allowed to do that because, oh no, that means you're better than the people at the central farm that you were required to work at. No, you can't have more than they have. No. Because if you start working, guess what? That leads to you becoming a business owner or a bourgeois because you'll start selling your excess to your neighbor, won't you? Well, of course you would, right? So therefore, nobody can produce anything except what the state tells you can produce, and they're always going to keep you so hungry that they can control you. And 500,000 brain dead people at Lincoln Park said, "Yeah, we want that. We want that." Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. I mean, that doesn't sound bad on its face, does it? I mean, you want more machines and so forth. But again, you had things like this happen in Mao's China when the peasants were told to produce food on the central farms. All the excess that could have gone to feed them while tens of millions of them starved was taken by Mao and sold somewhere else so that he could make money for the central government, you see, because we're all in this together, right? So that's what really happens when you combine agriculture with manufacturing under communism. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country. Right now we have some urban sprawl. I don't know that this has happened yet, but our forefathers, this is why we put in the 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 voting. What's the word? I can't think of the word. The electoral college in our voting system is so that there is a distinction between rural and urban, because what happens is when people become urbanites is the urbanites tend to think all in one mind because they are receivers. They're not producers that are close to hands-on. They're not the manufacturers for the largest extent. They're not the growers and the farmers. Okay, and so if you take away the voice of the people who actually make it and give it to the people who are just taking, then they'll just take more and more and more, and less and less and less will ever get made, and the rights of the people actually doing anything get eroded. So when you hear either party now, because there's so little difference between the Republican and Democratic Party now, when you hear either party say that they want to abolish the Electoral College, watch out, watch out. Because this is what they're talking about straight from the Communist Manifesto: gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. So again, you get your immigrants in, and what are they doing? Oh, they're shipping them. You think that the governor of Texas is being a wise guy by sending his immigrants up to DC into New York City, and ha ha ha. No, I trust you. Trust me, I believe with all my heart that this is a planned event where the governor of New York and the governor of Texas, they are working off the same playbook. Yeah, we're going to make it look like for your people that you're sending them up here. But by the way, a few years earlier, we said we really want immigrants. We're going to be nice to all the immigrants. Oh, and then, by the way, send some over here to these other places too, because we need to fill the land full of immigrants and make everybody basically the same. So we need to send the broke people all over the country. Notice we're not bringing in the doctors and the lawyers and the geniuses and the artists and so forth. No, we're bringing in the people who can't do anything by design. Okay. A more equitable distribution of the population over the country. And this is why you see the federal government bring in planeful after planeful of people from all over the world, and they equally distribute them around the country as best they can. This is straight out of the Communist Manifesto. Now you know why they do these things. Number 10, free education for all children in public schools. Wait a minute, but America does that. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is not the first time education was created in America. Actually, the old Deluder Satan Act of 1640s or 50s was technically the first uh, act for free education in the New World, but it was solidified for the United States by the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that said that one part of each so much land had to be set aside for public schools. This is why you have part of the Ordinance of 1787 listed on the placard in front of the one of the buildings at Ohio University, and it says religion and morality being so important to our country, education must be maintained, et cetera, et cetera. I can't quote it perfectly. Just look it up. And it's right there at Ohio University on a big sign in front of one of their buildings. This part of 1787. So it doesn't sound bad that we have free education for all children in public schools, does it? But what did we say? They've taken away any sort of ability to uh, improve them through competition. So if the federal government wouldn't even necessarily need to allow private schools per se, if all public schools were allowed to compete without federal government interference for their state money. And this is why the federal Department of Education was established to begin with to prevent anything like this from happening, to make sure that the federal government had too much oversight into schools, because your schools are controlled at the end of the day by your local school board. But if we can get our textbooks from England, the people that we supposedly threw out but have been attacking and rewriting our history and stolen our wealth from Hugh Squire and his family and from the founders, if we can allow them to make our textbooks through how the federal government works, through acts and through departments of federal education. Remember, before Jimmy Carter, the Department of Education did not exist in this country. They had no ability to manipulate and control which textbooks you had to read, and whether or not you can use pronouns that reflect the real reality of the world in your school. No, they had no way to manipulate. So they had to get that money into a system to start offering it to schools and to local school boards in the states and so forth. In exchange for, this is how the federal government works in this country. They can't tell a state what to do straight up. So they create an act instead of a law, and they use it in place of a law by manipulating you through money. And that's how our system works. So that is how our free education system works. Everybody has to get the same lies, the same kind of schooling, the same bologna sandwiches, BS, propaganda from the state, and you're not allowed to think for yourself or compete. If schools were allowed to just compete with each other for those dollars, they would fix their own problems. So you need a Department of Education to step in and say, no, no vouchers, no competition. Uh, sure, we still technically allow private schools because we know it's not that big of a threat because nobody can afford it. We've got all the money. Oh, and, by the way, because of, religion and all this stuff, uh, the very few people who want that will go over there, and then they won't even have any sort of morals in our schools either. So to them, that's a win-win, you see. So free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Okay, for one thing in number 10, we can completely agree on the abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, like they have in Pakistan right now. You see, in Lahore, the city of Lahore, you have a couple million Christians in a nation dominated by Muslims. Okay, now the Muslims, being the majority, are more than happy to, and I don't mean everybody does this, but many of them are more than happy to uh, exploit these children and their Christian neighbors by they'll say, "Here's a contract for so much money if you come work for me," and you've got little kids going to these brick factories that have to pay off these contracts, and then they'll layer the loan in such a way that you can never ever repay the loan. So you'll go over there and as a little kid, and you'll 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, they're making bricks and moving bricks for mom and dad for pennies a day, and they'll never repay that loan given to them by that brick factory owner. So yeah, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. This is the one thing that Karl Marx got right. Okay, so yes, we do need free education, but not like we have it now. Probably that was the end goal of probably what was in Marx's mind, I imagine. But he did get at least one thing right out of these 10. And as we saw, there's more than one thing in each one of these 10 commandments of communism, if you will. But yeah, children's labor definitely was properly done. However, if we had a decent people that lived in this country, and we sure don't, do we? But if we had a decent population and decent citizenry, then in some cases it would behoove society to allow some children to work to help their parents to some extent, but they would have to be treated equally. There should be standards to make sure that they're able to do the job and so forth. And only down maybe, let's be reasonable, 12 or 13 or something, not 5. I mean, there might be some room for some kids to work part-time to help their parents in difficult situations, that I think we could even relax that rule some. uh, but I don't think we can do it with the kind of people that live in this country today, because we would just go straight to what Pakistan's doing. So, all right. Well, I talked a lot about how Nazis are running America, but remember the difference between Nazis and communism. What is the main difference? They both, and you say, well, fascism, right, versus communism. It's not really the thing. Okay, it is, but it isn't. All right. Yeah, that's a part of it. But Hitler hated communism because of the atheist rule. Okay. Hitler, his goal was to start a third Reich. Remember, the first Reich went from 800 to 1800, from Christmas Day of 800 till when Charlemagne began his reign, to Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, you had the First Reich, okay, the Holy Roman Empire that ruled most of Germany and France and Central Europe. Then there was a small time that he considered the Second Reich, and then there's what he wanted was to create the Third Reich, which he said wanted to last another 1,000 years, which of course never got started, so that didn't actually happen, right, because of the war. Now, Hitler's goal was to revamp the Holy Roman Empire. In other words, to restore the Catholic authority of the world, in essence, okay? To restore the Pope's authority. Now, after World War II, remember, we had tens of thousands of Nazis in this country before World War II. They did protest openly and stuff before the war, and then it got a little quieter after they realized all their neighbors were going to probably hurt them if they didn't shut up. but some of them still had protests. We had a lot of Nazis in this country, and it was more than tens of thousands. We had a lot of Nazis in this country, and they didn't just disappear after World War II. Okay, they were still here. They're still operating, and they work very close in tangent with the German government of Great Britain. Now remember the Windsors is a name that they chose for themselves. Their family name is really Saxe-Coburg out of Germany. This is a German family. This is why Hitler used to say, I don't want to bomb Britain. Okay. Eventually he was forced into it. I don't believe he ever really, if Britain would have left him alone, I don't think he'd have touched Great Britain at all. He said he considered them equal people, you know. So whatever, whether that includes a racial stereotype or not, at the time he believed they were pretty much the same as the Germans. Well, that's true. So the Queen of England married a real, authentic Nazi SS guard. That was her husband for 50, 60 years. The whole time she was running. Now you have Harry, who's the son of a Nazi SS guard. Think about that. That's why he dressed with the Nazi symbol. And now you say, oh, that was just tabloids reported that. No, no, no. It was a real picture. Now the propaganda is trying to get you to believe that only tabloids looked at that. But no, that wasn't the case when he originally did it. He dressed up in a Nazi uniform for a costume event of some sort. And he did that because he was alluding to his real family heritage. Well, the Germans, the Nazis of Great Britain, collaborate with the Nazis in the United States, took over the FBI, and have been since in some form. They all got together, some added in over the centuries, but they've been attacking this country since Great Britain's been doing it since the very beginning. We kicked them out. They didn't just quit. Okay. We 30 years later, they burned down our White House on January 6th under Trump, and Trump is a German name, by the way. He was bailed out by Deutsche Bank. Those are German banks, right? Uh, the people who busted the windows in the White House was the Proud Boys. Who are the Proud Boys? Oh, an organization run by, oh, Brits. So they've attacked our White House now twice in our history. They're the ones who broke the windows. They're the ones who opened the doors. They're the ones who barged in first and then let the crowds in afterward. It was the Proud Boys run by people from Britain. Okay. So now our capital's been burned down in the War of 1812 and then again attacked on January 6, 2020. So those are the kinds of people, the British monarch and people with the power in the hands of a few who've been in collaboration with the later Nazis that came along. And Nazis have been here since the 1870s or 80s or something like that, you know. And what was their goal was to establish religion. So why is Trump on the side of religion? Because he's a pious guy? No. With the World Council of Churches, we all know he's not a pious or a decent person by any stretch of the imagination, but he holds the Nazi sort of aspect. And that's why I think he's being supported right now from Great Britain. This is why he stands a really good chance of winning, by the way. This is why I think he's going to pick Haley, who's a lady from India right now. Have you noticed that all the vice presidents and several people running for president just all of a sudden out of nowhere are from India because Britain, that's one of Britain's colonies was India, right? And Kamala Harris is from Sri Lanka, which is part of India, and her father was Jamaican, but she's part of both. Slave trader from Jamaica. So Harris was that Ramaswamy, the Indian guy, even the libertarian vice president. I can't remember her name. She also is Indian from India. So just coincidence, right? No, the British throne is pushing really hard for somebody from India, and I'm sure that has something to do with something they want to do or some British policy in their government. Not is not in our best interest. by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe it's in retaliation for something China's doing to Hong Kong. I don't know. You know, I can only speculate on why they want somebody from India so bad right now. Um, but so you have the Nazis on the Republican side, literal descendants of Nazis. George Bush, literally, not figuratively, literally, his great granddad Bush was taking pictures with Hitler, and was making uh, parachutes and Nazi uniforms down there in Greenville, Tennessee. That's why Hitler's limo is still there in Greenville, Tennessee today. So, uh, why were they running the CIA and all this, right? That's part of the infiltration and part of the FBI. And then you have the communist side, like the Hillary Clintons and Bill Clinton. So you still have the communists and the Nazis still fighting today. So do you want a Nazi president that's going to restore the World Council of Churches Pope for the Third Reich, and create a type of authority for the Pope? All your denominations in this country are, if you are in a denomination, you are part of the World Council of Churches. Almost all of them are, 95+%. If you're in a denomination, you are part of the World Council of Churches, which the Catholic Church basically runs and is, part. That's why you had Billy Graham, always such a buddy. He's supposed to be the Protestant, right? But he was always such a buddy with the Pope. you know, Couldn't say enough good things about the Pope. He's supposed to have deep ideological differences, according to his theology and the Catholic theology. But no, that was one theology because they were all buddies, right? Uh, they pretended to have different theology, but no, at the end of the day, they were friends. So they were working through the World Council of Churches. Oh, and that's the same family that's Billy Graham. That's the same family that Senator Graham, these, from the Carolinas and Michigan, that run Graham Media, that employ Barr, and Trump Trump employed Attorney General Barr, whose family was working for Graham there in Detroit. So you see, those are your two options. Do you want to restore the Pope, or um, do you want a communist government? And it doesn't matter. All three parties, the libertarians are part of it. You can see they're already being manipulated and run straight out of Great Britain with their Indian vice president. Don't buy this nonsense about a third party. Somehow they're different. No, they're exactly the same. Rand Paul and Ron Paul, they were part of those who stole Hugh's trademark bottom line from, right out from underneath them. And who's Ron Paul? They were all libertarian third party people um, before they had to run as Republicans to get elected. So uh, so that's the reality of your country. It's not what most people think or have understood, but that's the best I can say it. And this is straight everything I gave you today. I was reading straight out of the 1848 Communist Manifesto. If you came in late, you can pick one of these up on internet for $5 or whatever. I happened to find one at a bookstore a couple weeks ago. But pick one up and actually read it. No, you're not going to agree with it, but you don't just read things you agree with. Read things you don't agree with, so that so you're not stupid. So you're well-rounded in education, because we all know your federally government, centrally dominated schools are not going to give you an education. You have to seek it out for yourself now. It's the only way you're going to learn anything. Bye.